Dominico Giacobbe is a spacecraft mechanic working on the Artemis moon rocket, NASA's next manned spaceship to the lunar surface, as well as a U.S. military veteran and, more importantly, one of my best friends. I was incredibly grateful to have this introspective conversation with Dom, and I really appreciate his time to come sit down and have this discussion with me. This was an immensely engaging and interesting conversation to have with Dom as we discussed the ineffability of the universe, the purpose of life, mortality, the relationship between empathy and love, spirituality, the ways in which the ideologies we might hold now may be viewed as wrong from the perspective of future generations, political polarization, technological advancement, reconciling the belief in extraterrestrial life with religion, and more. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I have, and links to everything we discussed and how to support this podcast are linked in the show notes. My name is Evan Liel. I've been traveling continuously for the past 2 years, and this is simply my humble attempt at capturing the genuine conversations I have along the way, discovering the essence of what it means to pursue a life well lived through the contemplation of love, death, meaning, and existence.
Well, you already said you were into philosophy and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, what made me want to do this was like, I got into philosophy, but I think really at the core of everything that I'm doing here, it's about, I guess, just, I guess really, originally at the start of everything, I started to have a lot of conversations that really shaped me and became like who I was, or it started to shape me into who I was really as like a person. And I wanted to kind of bring that out in other, like, I guess, start sharing that with other people because the conversations that I have had been so transformative for me. Yeah. And then when I started to think about like my own career goals and like what I want to do, I always find myself being drawn back to like the more, I guess like the more existential or like deeper parts to life and to just having conversations. So a podcast was naturally like the one thing that I thought of as something that I would really like to do. And I kept putting it off for such a long time that eventually I couldn't really put anything higher than this on my list because I've worked at different, restaurants and grocery stores or hostels or whatever, even working for like Northrop and in the Marine Corps. Like I just knew all of those things I couldn't do, and I don't like working for somebody else. Yeah. And so being like, I don't know how long this would take, for me to like really make any money off of this, but it's what I want to do. And it's something I'm passionate about. So
yeah, I mean, it transcends that like, oh, how much money am I going to make off a thing when you're doing something to kind of like not only better yourself, but it almost works kind of like almost like how somebody keeps a journal and stuff like that. You can go back, listen to the different conversations you've had with people. Yeah. Listen to the different things you've learned. They've learned from you. You've learned from them and stuff like that. And, it basically is like, documenting your growth along,
Yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely that. It's definitely more than just like a side hobby thing. It's like what I want to do. Yeah. And, we'll see where it's still in its nascent stages, just beginning, Yeah. So we'll see where it goes, but I'm just going to continue doing it and see what happens. That's kind of how I live my life anyways. So.
I mean, absolutely, dude. I mean, it's like you have so much experience now from different like facets of life. Like I said, you've literally done like everything from, being in the Marine Corps to then getting out, working for Northrop for a little bit and then traveling the world and meeting all these different people and experiencing all the different ways people live life and their, different thought processes and stuff like that. So
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's been quite a journey for sure. Definitely. So yeah, but I guess with that, we've been recording. So, Dominico Giacobbe.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for making your way out to do this podcast.
No problem, man.
You came all the way out to California to do a podcast with me.
That's it. Only thing was it. I was like, I need to go there right now and just continue to knock on your door until you open it.
No, it's great. So, Dom, we met in the Marine Corps.
Yep.
And we've been best of friends ever since.
Dude, it's been a while.
So
now.
one of my best friends in the world that I can think of is you, Dom. Appreciate it, man. Really, truly. It's I'm glad to have you on. What do you do?
That's a good question. Okay, so what I do now currently is I work as a quality inspector for Boeing on NASA's SLS project, so the Artemis moon rocket, which is really cool because the last time we went to the moon was I believe 1972, early 70s was the last time we went to the moon. So it's pretty much the next jump to get us to the moon, and then continue with humanity exploring onto Mars with kind of to work in conjunction with the stuff that SpaceX is doing and whatnot too. It's all kind of towards a similar goal. So yeah,
that's really cool, dude. I think we were having a conversation yesterday about this, and it's pretty incredible, like some of the stuff you get to work on and the betterment of humanity and how far something like this can actually really take humanity, and it's really cool that you're a part of that for sure. What is it exactly that drew you to working on rockets?
I always was interested in space and kind of like the whole concept of like what's beyond and things that are hard to wrap your mind around without going in and exploring it. And I've always been interested in kind of the concept of like the human, something bringing like the human race together as a whole. Obviously there's a lot of conflict within humanity and stuff like that, but kind of universally when you look at like stuff like space travel, going to the moon, going to Mars, like expanding human civilization, into the stars, it kind of seems like a unifying factor. You can find people from all over the world that don't speak the same language and stuff like that, may have different cultures, but they all look up at the stars and see, what they wonder what's out there, kind of deal like that. So being able to be part of that and like part of a legacy that will live on far after me and stuff like that, was kind of what drew me to it. Just being able to be part of something that like, hey, this is for the betterment of like humankind in general, and the next steps.
Definitely. That's so cool, dude. So cool. That's probably what I always talk. I always talk about you to my other friends. I always brag about you. I'm like, dude, I got a friend who works on rockets that are getting sent to the moon. Like, it's so cool. It's such a interesting job. And I think, like you said, it's more than just, like fighting wars and like trying to kill people through, government technologies. This is something that's furthering humanity as a species, as a like collective like being of people on Earth, and we're moving towards something expanding off of Earth, and like who knows where that actually goes. But I think it's the natural step in like the evolutionary process of humanity is to kind of leave and like see what else is out there.
Absolutely.
But why do you think that humans have this desire to leave or to see further outside of our own kind of Earth bubble?
That's a really good question. I think at their base level, human nature is to explore, like conquer, explore, find new things. Basically, I mean, if you look at like the beginning of humanity in itself and how humans just spread out throughout the world. I mean, if you look even just back in history from like, if you look at just from like the, something super small, like the United States, like the expansion westward and stuff like that, like the whole manifest destiny and all of the things like that. But you can find, you can change the words around, you can change the countries around, but I guarantee you could find something in every single country and culture that that focuses on like expanding and finding new places and stuff like that. And I don't know maybe exactly what it boils down to, but if I had to put a guess, it's just like the human need to grow, if that makes sense. Like to grow, to explore, to find, to evolve and stuff like that. I also think it's like the unknown, finding out what's out there. You know, I guess you could like really get really deep into it and be like, oh, well, what's the meaning of why everyone's here? And people look up at the sky, at the stars and be like, well, you know, we don't know about what's out there. So is the answer out there? Where did we come from? Kind of thing like that. You know, so I think it's kind of based in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where my mind goes, though. My mind goes to the questions, like you said, like, well, you look up, look at the stars, you look at the universe, and you put us in relation to how big everything is. And for me, I wonder, like, what are we doing here? And this came really in this came to me really in a few ways, because I didn't normally live my life like that. I would love to hear your perspective on how kind of you grew up thinking. But for me, I kind of lived life monotonously and just kind of went along with whatever happened to it. And I never really thought about the bigger picture, what existence is at all, and what life means to even be aware of anything that could be, or that is awareness of whatever that meant. And so for me, yeah, there were a few profound, I guess, experiences that I had that really shaped my way of thinking and really put life in a different perspective for me. And you know, that's why I've kind of oriented my life really to discovering what the essence of this really means, like what this is. Because to me, it doesn't make it's the most interesting question to ask for me personally. Like what does it mean to exist? What is this? Is there, are we, alone? Is there a God? If so, what do they look like? What are these things? What does it mean? And so I would like to hear your perspective on like how you grew up thinking and kind of the way some of the experiences you've had has shaped your way of kind of contemplating this.
That's a good question. So as far as like how I grew up thinking, honestly, that's a good question. I don't think anyone has ever asked me like where it all, I guess, started from. If I really had to think about it, I'd probably say that, I always grew up thinking that, there's no way, just learning the second I learned about like how vast like outer space was and it's continuously expanding and like really how small we are compared to everything around us. I always kind of had the mindset of like, there's no, like, it seems more crazy to me to believe that there's, nothing else out there than that there would be, that there's nothing out there than to be that, it would just be that there is something out there. I know the way I said that kind of sounded weird, but what I'm saying essentially is like, if you just factor in like, the probability that there is some kind of other life form out there, whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? It seems much more likely to me that there always would be. I always thought like, wow, there's all this out there. How is everything only right here on Earth? And kind of as I got older and I, like learned more things and kind of like shaped things with religion and stuff like that and just life. I kind of was thinking like, hey, what we were talking earlier, why are we here? Nobody had necessarily those answers for me. So I kind of started looking on my own kind of thing, looking inside, what have I learned throughout my life, and kind of thought like, hey, are we here for a purpose? Is that purpose to, reach out as far as we can? Is that purpose for us to reach out to whatever is up in the stars that, where to find out where we came from, kind of thing like that. I guess it was kind of a mix between like a spiritual thinking and like I don't know. I don't know what to call it. I think more so than when I was young, more so now than when I was younger is when I really started to think about it, and I really started to get involved with like programs like this that I'm working on now, and it really put in perspective for me, you know, the questions that are being asked that you're asking me right now, you know.
Yeah.
I guess I feel like I said a whole lot of nothing, you know.
No, you definitely said some stuff.
I don't know. I guess I don't know how to describe it. You know, a lot of people have clashes with like their like religion and their ideologies and stuff like that. But I don't know. I found a way to kind of be like, to kind of put it all together, being like, hey, just because I believe in this doesn't mean that I can't also be like, hey, there's more out there than what we're given, you know. I kind of put it all in like in an all encompassing thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I think a point I want to bring up, because you did say a lot of interesting things there. But a point I want to bring to light within that is everyone's struggling with how to describe it, you know, like you're not the one person that's like, I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah.
Like that is like at the core of everybody's existence, is like trying to figure out what the point of this is. And, you know, for some people it's a specific religion, and for some people, you know, they call it spirituality, and for other people they, you know, it's agnosticism or atheism or whatever, you know, nothing matters or nothing has inherent meaning, you know, and there's so many ways to interpret existence as it is. And I think that's what's so interesting about it, you know? So, like having difficulties describing what it is the natural way of figuring it out, just because we're so, I mean, I don't know if it's a question of our limitations as humans and as minds within a human body, you know, but it's definitely something that is incomprehensible to you or I. It's something that's like it's something that is larger than what we can comprehend cognitively, but at the same time, it's all we can go off of is our own mind. It's our own consciousness. So, it becomes something that is indescribable. So there's no need to kind of, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people, they're like, I can't describe it, but like that is the point of it. That is
describing it almost.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, something I was just thinking about too is obviously it's different for everybody, like we were just saying, but I think also like the existence of a higher purpose or something out there, whatever that is for you, gives people kind of also like a set of guidelines to live by, something either to look forward to or something, you know, kind of like a, like a purpose, almost like, hey, like this, there is something else out, there's something, whatever that is for you, there is something out there, and there's something I need to, you know, actively search for and reach for, whether that's like you looking, you know, into yourself to build yourself as a better person, or if you're like, hey, I want to be part of asking those questions and doing the things of like, hey, what is out there? You know what I'm saying? I think it just gives people something to base their selves off of, you know, and I think that helps, you know, it may help some people more than others, but, it's definitely helped me to kind of be like, hey, like I have base like a moral compass off of, you know what I'm saying? Like, and being like, hey, this is something I'm trying to find out, not just for myself, but I want to be part of finding it out for, you know, the rest of humanity too. So
totally. Yeah. And that's something I think about a lot, is morality and how, what the foundations of morality are. But that gets into so many, intricate and interesting conversations there alone. Morality is such a massive topic for so many people, because there are so many ways to object to certain people's ideas of what may or may not feel intuitively right or wrong.
I was going to say there's a lot of gray areas in it, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, exactly. And so like the way I try to think about morality is less in the way of right and wrong, but more of like our collective well-being. Yeah. Because I mean, there are so many ways in which we can come to some tricky intuitions that might not conform to, I guess, our inherent ethical and moral intuitions. So
absolutely,
it is difficult, especially when so many people have differing baselines for what morality may or may not mean.
I mean, if you think about it, something as basic as like, oh, like somebody steals something, right? Like, let's say they're stealing food or something like that. If you're asking that person that's stealing food to feed their family that's starving, morally that's going to come out to a different answer than the store owner who they stole it from, right? So I think that's a perfect way to look at it. Is like it's very, obviously there are certain things that are, I think we could probably all generally agree on, that are like morally bad and good, but there's a lot of in between stuff in there that it's like, you're, like you said, it's very situation dependent, and there's a lot of gray areas. I don't think it's quite as like black and white as everyone said, as like the storybooks tell when you're a kid, like, oh, this is a good person or a good deed, and this is a bad person and a bad deed. I don't think that exists anywhere near as much as, people try and say it does.
Yeah, totally. And I think when you start exploring different religions and different ways of thinking and different ideas that have been spread across the globe pertaining to, I guess, the overarching like spiritual concept of life, you can start to see so many differences, but at the same time you can see a lot of similarities as well. So it makes it incredibly interesting to try to like parse through all of them or as many as you can, and see what is there and what's to be gleaned from each piece of I guess wisdom that has been handed down over the human species. It's incredibly interesting. Do you describe yourself as somebody that is a spiritual person, or do you subscribe to any specific religion?
Yeah, actually, so what's funny is I grew up, like Roman Catholic. My family's Italian, so it was Roman Catholic was the default religion for me. And as I got older, I kind of like questioned a lot of things, and I really wasn't sure. I guess at the time, like where I was going, what I thought was real and what I thought wasn't. And it wasn't until later in life, because now I consider myself fairly like spiritual person. I identify as Christian and stuff like that, and I follow the Christian religion. But I didn't really find like Christianity and start getting religious until I had some like near death experiences, kind of, and like started to see things as a whole. And obviously, like I said, it's different for everybody, but I kind of saw myself being like, hey, what, like, I had no moral compass. I was like, what is the reason why I'm doing things or acting how I'm acting and stuff like that? And for me, it was like a higher purpose that I needed to guide myself, if that made sense. I found myself in like, I think the first time too that the first time I had seen somebody, so that crash at WTI, the first time I had seen two people lose their lives, and then I had earlier in my career in the Marine Corps had gotten almost in the helicopter crash, kind of put in perspective for me, like, hey, like, how easy life can be lost and how fragile it is. And I kind of lost that whole invincible, like, you're young and you think you're an invincible, individual, nothing can happen to you. And seeing that happen kind of started me on like a more spiritual, route, and, it kind of just grew from there, just from being after I got out of the Marine Corps and stuff like that, kind of being lost a little bit and not knowing what I wanted to do and stuff like that. I had found Christianity again, and I kind of started relying on that and building, myself back up and building a moral compass of just like the kind of person I wanted to be and how I wanted to be and act, and how I wanted to grow myself. And that's all pretty recent, within the last couple of years. I really didn't any of that until a little bit before I got out of the Marine Corps, and I started looking at life a little bit differently.
Totally.
So
yeah, no, and just to briefly describe what happened to you, for people who don't know who are listening to this, what happened so I guess what was the what happened with the crash? Just briefly describe it.
So WTI, for the people who are listening that don't know, is a weapons and tactics instructor course. So it's basically a really large exercise that the military goes out and does, and there's a lot of working components going on it. Me and Evan were crew chiefs, so we were door gunners in the back of a Huey. And so one night it was our first flight actually of the training exercise. It was pretty late at night. I don't remember exactly what time, but maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night, something like that. And we went out to a range. We were shooting on that range. And then I remember, well, from my perspective, I remember I was looking out the opposite side of the helicopter that the crash occurred on. I was wearing night vision goggles, so all of a sudden I seen like a huge bright light reflecting off of the mountains behind us, and I turned around and it looked like somebody dropped napalm in those old like Vietnam movies, and everyone was kind of silent. Nobody knew what was going on. Our pilots came over the radio. They asked if there was some jets that dropped bombs in that area. There wasn't. Then we had thought maybe the refueling point we had there had blown up. It wasn't that. And then I had heard one of our captains come over the radio in the Cobra saying that there was an aircraft that had went down. And at that time, every single person in every single aircraft, I can't remember how many aircraft there were. There was I think like maybe four to six aircraft that were in that evolution with that occurring. I'd known everyone personally in all those aircraft except for the one aircraft that actually crashed, which I didn't know at the time. But so at the time, my mind was racing like, oh, like which one of my friends just died basically, because like I said, every single one of them were in all of the other aircraft except for that one. And unfortunately, we had gotten to the crash site. It was too dark to see on unaided, off night vision goggles. All you could see is the fire, and then when you put them on, the fire was too strong, too bright to see into it. And no one was able to land because they still had active ordnance on the aircraft, and essentially we had to leave, and they had to call in a search and rescue team to come there. Now, knowing what I know now, there was nobody that survived. They had impacted the ground. They basically got target fixated, and they'd impacted the ground at over 100 miles an hour very quickly. So they didn't survive that. But afterwards, they had a wake afterwards. The two pilots that passed away, they were from a different squadron, so I didn't know them personally. Just in passing at WTI, I had seen them, but I did go to their wake and saw they had their families there. One of them had like a really young kid and stuff like that, and it put in perspective for me, like, hey, like this is very real. Beforehand, I had thought that. I was like, there's no way, there's nothing that can happen to me. It's not, whatever, it can't happen. I thought I was bulletproof, whatever. And then after seeing that, I don't want to say it put a value on life, because I always knew life obviously had a value, but it made it tangible, if that made sense. It made me realize, hey, like, regardless of what it is, like you can lose your life and that's it. Like it could be today, tomorrow, whenever, and everything you've done up into that point, like that's it. That's all you got. You don't have anything, you can't affect the world. You can't change, what you've done or what you're going to do after that. That's it. So, after that had happened, I think that's what kind of like eventually started pushing me towards being like, hey, I just, wanted to change, not necessarily change, because it wasn't like I was doing anything bad or anything like that, but like, I just was like, hey, I want some kind of moral compass and guideline of like how I want to better myself and the people around me in my life. Cause I guess from that moment forward, I valued life a lot more, after I seen it be taken away so quickly at that point. So.
Totally. Yeah. And that really speaks to, I mean, there's so many points to respond to in that, but I think, that really speaks to the way the Marine Corps can really just take, or the military in general can take in these like young, naive people and bring them into a situation where you don't actually know or gain or have any real understanding of what you're actually doing. And it's not just it's not the Call of Duty video game you see online. It's not the movies you see on Netflix or watching
Absolutely.
watching The Pacific or Band of Brothers. It's something real. You're training to kill other people. You're training to harm other people for no real reason other than government bureaucracy and supporting politicians who don't have your interest in mind. And it's scary that it's the way it is like this. And I know we've had conversations in the past about this, but for me, it's something that I've come to such big revelations about exiting the Marine Corps, and it's really shaped my perspective on, like you said, like what are we actually doing here? What was the point of doing this? What's the point of what was the point of my service? And so, that I wrestled with a lot. And another point being your this closeness to death that you experienced, and this wasn't the only time death has been close to you, but it is something that I know you've had to come across, and myself as well. But what is your relationship to death as something that is inherently unknowable?
That's a good question. Well, I'd say, so the first time I had gotten close was, as you and me were talking yesterday, with our friend Alex. Me and him were in the back of a helicopter, and there was some stuff that went wrong, long story short, and we ended up being okay, but it was very close to being a not okay situation where we almost fell out of the sky, and we just barely made it down to an emergency landing, safe. But that was the first time, I guess, I had gotten. That's like the first time at all I had been in any kind of situation where I was like, "Wow, I almost, I almost died." So, I would say that as far as a relationship wise, it basically put me in a spot where I was like, "Okay, this exists." Like, obviously, again, I'm saying I knew death existed before then, but like I said, until it's right in front of you or you're faced with it. It's kind of one of those things of like, it's there, but you're just like, oh, it's, that's something that's going to happen to me when I'm 90 years old, so far down the road. It just basically made me realize that it's always there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a natural part of life that it's always there, but it basically drove me to want to be not just a better person, but accomplish more, if that makes sense. It being... I would say it's I don't know the exact word I would use to describe the relationship I have with it, but it would be one of like, hey, I know you're there, and that motivates me to make sure I'm not wasting my life, if that makes sense. And that's obviously different for everybody, that, what that means, whether what quote unquote wasting your life would be. But yeah, that's what I'd probably say.
It seems like it was a motivating factor for you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was definitely like hey, this is here. This can happen to you. Who do you want to be remembered as, and what do you want to be while you're here? Because you may not get to choose when you're done, Yeah,
exactly. No, I find myself thinking the exact same way. And for me, it really came when I started to have realizations about what life was, what existence was. And so it is such an elusive part of life, because it's always there, yet it's not there at all. And so it's it has become, my relationship for death has really become something, as you kind of have, where it's this motivation to really pursue life for what it has to offer, because there is no guarantee that this next moment will exist at all. And I think when you live like that, to a degree, it can really sort things out in one's head, as to what we're pursuing. You know, what makes life worth pursuing at all. And you know, everything is within everything, and everything I think should be taken within moderation. You know, I think for myself, I think about death more than I maybe other people, or maybe more than I should. But for me, it is good to think about, because if I don't, I think I would get trapped in the thought that I will live forever, and that this won't end until I'm 80, or when, you know, I have some sort of control over it, even though we don't know. You know, we can get outside and start our car and drive off in the freeway, you know, on our way back from work, and get hit by a truck, and you have no idea.
Exactly.
And that's it. That's the end. Like you said, like that's just the end of your story. That's just the end of who you were, as like at least a human conscious being. And we don't know what happens after that. And there's, you know, you have ideas and you have faith. Some people have faith and some people don't. But we don't know. We know there's no 100% certainty with it. And so, you know, that, I think that leads me into the question I want to ask you of like, what exactly makes this life worth pursuing for you?
So I would say, I just want to say one thing too about what we were just talking about, and then I'll go into that. But
yeah,
I was going to say, I think the important thing too is to learn, and it's hard, you know, but I think the important thing is to learn to not be afraid of it. You know, obviously you don't want to let fear control you, and you don't want to let the fear of dying control you. Like you said, there's moderation, right? You got to know it's there and it exists, and, you know, work with it, if that makes sense. But, as far as the question you just asked me, for me personally, what makes life worth pursuing is, I'd say, building like a better life for my family, myself and my family, and the people around me. Essentially, if I can leave the people I've touched in my life and the things I've done, you know, the world in general, a better place than when I came into it, I think that would be, you know, that would be what it would be for me, you know, whether that's, you know, taking care of, doing what I'm doing now, the program I'm doing now, you know, helping, you know, humanity take the next steps, or, you know, just building a good family, you know, eventually down the road, possibly raising some kids and stuff like that. And, you know, giving them the tools to be successful in life, and kind of like a ripple effect, you know, where they're going to use what I teach them to, you know, better themselves and the world around them. I would just say that, just being happy, and just, like I said, making everything you touch and interact with, try and leaving it better than, you know, it was when you found it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. I think that's a great answer. I think that's it's something admirable to take into account the lives of others and not just yourself. Yeah. That's, I think, at the core of humanity. We're such social creatures and dependent on one another to such a high degree, where if we aren't pursuing betterment for each other, then we're really not bettering anything. Yeah. So, and that's such a huge point. And I think we can often forget about that. I think it's easy to forget and get so consumed by our own individuality and our own minds and our own lives, because we can only view existence through our own singular consciousness as we experience it. And so we forget that everyone else is having the same experience that we are, and it's something that I think if something that I try to think more and more about, and to not let other people's lives just pass me by, like it's not something immensely important, because it is, because everything we do is really predicated on something that came before. And so all the experiences we have are based around the experiences of other people. And so making, this world or whatever this universe is into some sort of better state of well-being is I think at the forefront of everything. And I find, I think this is a conversation that I've been having with my partner, but about kind of the US's individuality, and how I think the US really takes some, our individual freedoms and mindsets a little too far, without thinking collectively as much as we should be, because it becomes dangerous to think so solipsistically, I think, or individually, that we really kind of neglect some of the real harsh realities of the lives of other people. But I think it also comes with our sense of empathy, like how to become more empathetic. It's like it's one thing to say like, oh, we should care about other people, but how do we do that? Like how do we go about being more empathetic? What would you think? What would you say is probably, or I guess what would you say is the kind of the right steps to take to become a more empathetic, a more caring, loving person?
So I would say that honestly, and this is going to sound super simple, because I think it is, and it's just actually talking to people. Like the biggest thing, it's funny because the internet and everything, everyone always talks about how it brings the whole world closer. And while it does do that, I think like putting a screen between you and another person also like dehumanizes them, if that makes sense. You see people arguing on the internet, like saying like the most horrible, like the internet literally brings out some of the worst in people. I mean, you could go to any like Facebook comment thread, you'll see people saying like the worst things that they probably would never say to each other in person. And it kind of all breaks down once you talk to somebody and you speak with them and you're like, hey, this is like, not only is this like an actual person, another human being, that has their own life going on, but you have probably a lot more in common with them than you don't, and a lot of times that separation of just interacting with people from around the world all the time, through a screen, kind of puts that, it kind of makes you forget that hey, this is another like it highlights the divides, it highlights the division instead of the, hey, this is another person with family feelings, whatever, they got their own stuff going on. So honestly, I'd say the number one thing to be more empathetic is just to actually get out and talk to people, have conversations with them, especially like don't put yourself in an echo chamber kind of deal. Like don't just have conversations with somebody you're like, oh, this person has all the exact same views as mine. Like, no, it's okay to have conversations with people that have differing views that you may disagree with, because it shows you the human side of their nature. It's like, hey, this person isn't a bad person or something just because they don't believe in what I may believe in. It just shows you, hey, they have different experiences and they've had different life events that have drawn them to these conclusions. And it really it humanizes that person, and it'll 100% give you more empathy by just going out and having conversations with people, touching grass, basically.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful point. It's conversation for me, like we were talking about earlier, has been so transformative, and so it puts people and it puts people and experiences and views into context, which I think is extremely important and something that is neglected in so much online conversation and so much of social media and cancel culture and whatever, kind of harmful societal kind of ways of thinking. And so for me, like that's where what I really took to heart and why I find conversations so profound, as for that exact reason. You have no idea exactly what a person is dealing with, what they're thinking, what they might be experiencing, what they have experienced in the past, until you go out and talk to them. And even then, you're not going to get the full experience. You're only going to get one single slice and one single moment of somebody's life. And you're never going to know what it's like to be in their head. And so giving people the benefit of the doubt, giving people this, the context that so much giving people the context that they deserve is so immensely important, because without it, we're just, we're stuck in our own way of thinking through our lens and judging somebody else without any real justification.
Absolutely.
There's so much to extrapolate even just from that.
That's the thing. That's what, I think, social media and all these things, they can be an awesome way to connect. If kind of going back into what we were talking about earlier about just moderation and stuff like that, they can be an awesome thing, but if you use it the wrong way or let it affect you the wrong way, they can be horribly detrimental. So, and it's hard to make that balance, but like I said, it gets easier the more people kind of just interact with their, humans for thousands and thousands of years, however long, have, interacted in person, right? And the last, 50 years or so is when, all of social media and everything has become so prevalent and has separated, like I said, brought people together, but also highlighted their divisiveness, too. So, like you said, humans are social creatures. They need to interact with each other. And, sometimes I feel like the interacting through interacting through the internet may kind of scratch that social quote unquote itch, but it's not really giving you what you need. You're not actually getting anything of substance. Not always, but mostly a lot of it is you're not actually getting that actual substance of being face to face with somebody. And there's so much you miss just in context wise. People don't realize too that humans communicate a lot through nonverbal body language and stuff like that you don't even know when you're having a conversation with somebody. You're processing their expressions, their body language, what they're doing. You lose all of that when you're talking to somebody through a screen. So,
oh, dude, I use emojis, bro.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. That's it, man. Actually,
it's just emojis. No. What do you think the relationship is between empathy and love?
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think you can be really. You probably can't love somebody if you're not going to be empathetic. If you don't have that capacity to be empathetic, I guess the reason I'm saying that is because you're not going to understand their everyday struggles, their everyday, because the thing is, it's when you have a relationship with somebody, it's not like the movies where it's everything's great and everything's perfect all the time, and you guys are you never have any kind of conflict or something like that. And it's normal to have conflict in a relationship. It's normal to argue and whatnot. But the thing is you can't get through any of that if you don't have any empathy for that person, or if you don't have the capacity for empathy at all. Because it helps you understand that person's side. And once, let's say you have a disagreement or an argument, it helps you be okay, hey, I care about this person cares about me. Where is this, where is this coming from? Where did they have a bad day? Did something occur? And it helps you understand them better. And overall, that's a huge part of loving somebody, is understanding them and, being able to, care for them. And that's like empathy is a core facet of that, if that makes sense.
Totally. That definitely makes sense. How much do you differentiate romantic love between other types of love? And, maybe you're having an argument with somebody, like you said, but they're not really somebody that care about you. They're just some random person. Yeah. Like how much do you think about
I see what you're
love
saying.
In terms of this is just the next, I guess this is just, evolving on your first point, how much do you give thought to love outside of the romantic notion?
I would say it goes back into like humanizing that, like having that, seeing that other person as a human. If you don't have, I think because empathy is related to caring in general, like you said, whether it's like a romantic side or just like, caring for somebody or loving your fellow man, like something like that. So like the thing is without empathy, you're not going to be able to care for that person, because you're not going to have that human aspect. You're not going to be like, hey, how I act towards this person is not just affecting, the outcome of right now, but it's going to affect them and, the outcome of, the rest of their day, depending on what your relationship is with that person, you know what I'm saying? I mean, when you look at like the epidemic of depression and like suicide and stuff like that, I think a lot of that comes from like people lacking that empathy for others. People they have a confrontation with a stranger or something like that. They're quick to get angry. They say hurtful things, do hurtful things, whatever, and they lack that empathy and that care to be like, well, I don't care what happens to this person after my interaction with them. And I think the world gets caught up in that a lot, and I think you need to have empathy, and you need to be able to recognize that, hey, this person, and I know I said it a couple times, but like, hey, this person is another human being. They have, a life. They're affected in the same ways that I am. So, you need empathy to be able to, to essentially humanize them, to be like, hey, this is another person, not just, an individual, or not just for lack of a better word, but like an NPC that I'm like, just gonna dump all my anger on and then go about my day, even if you don't know them. So.
Yeah, definitely humanizing. And I think that's so much, of what, it's probably something that we lack, I guess, so especially with social media and online society, is this lack of humanizing somebody, like you said earlier, or like you alluded to earlier. It's just a text on a screen, and it's not somebody that it doesn't seem real to you because it's not a person. You're not looking them in the eyes. You don't see them for their family, their upbringing, who they were, how they got brought up, their traumas in their past, and how they're trying to work on themselves, which is such a core part of any individual. I am somebody who is so far from perfect, where we all are, exactly, but I can only view it from my own lens, and so like I see myself as somebody who's so far from perfect and has so much to work on, and so much and has so much I guess work to be done, and we need to start seeing other people in that way, start seeing other people as just as complex and intricate as your own life. And it becomes difficult when you're not truly like face to face with somebody, or having a conversation, like genuinely trying to get to know somebody. And it's impossible to do that for every single person. Obviously it's you walk down the street and you bump into somebody, or somebody cuts you off on the road, or anything. You're not going to have the opportunity to gain an understanding of every single person's lives, or life that you interact with. But I think kind of having this inherent understanding that regardless of what you might know about somebody's personal life, there is something complex going on. And there is something extremely nuanced under the hood there. And that's important to realize operating through life, because it brings you the empathy, it brings you that care for another human.
I think something I want to say about the topic too, and this is going to be kind of like an overarching thing, but if you look throughout history and stuff like that, like humankind, like humans in general, have been capable of like very horrible acts, to each other, and a lot of it is committed by people who are just normal. The history books may paint like, oh, this this or that group was bad or whatever, but most of these acts are committed by like everyday average people, right, through dehumanizing each other and stuff like that. And I think it's important to note that none of us are special, and that kind of all that the ability to do these like horrible things are within all of us. And I think the humanity in it all is being able to recognize that, being able to control it, and be like, and not act on that, choose to be better, choose to have a better moral compass,
Yeah, I think what the last point you made was pretty quite a profound point, and it's something that I think about quite a bit. Is this idea that when we look at like this long arc of human history, when we look at the overarching idea of what we're doing here as a species, I think we can start to like parse through the previously held ideologies that we had, and start to kind of come to the ideas or ways of thinking in which we might have been wrong. So like what ways do you think that, or what ideologies do you think we hold right now that could be viewed as radically wrong from the perspective of future generations?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. I want to say probably, I don't know if it would be a considered really an idea, like an ideology, but the almost like taking for granted what we have, if that makes sense. Like people tend to act like the world we live in and the comforts we live in have existed forever, and that they always will exist. And actually, there's a really good quote about like hard men making good times. Good times make soft men, and soft men make hard times. And I think that
people.
What's that? Yeah.
Or people, women, everywhere.
Yeah, that's what the quote says.
Yeah. Well, who said that?
You know what? I have to look it. I have to look it up. I forgot exactly who said it, but I'll look it up in a minute and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, totally. But no, you're good. You're not. I'll look it up.
So essentially, what I mean is, we're seeing it now. The generation before us, like the boomer generation, kind of like lived through the golden age of the U.S., stuff like that, economically, and kind of didn't. Basically, instead of like living like moderately and like ensuring that the future generations had economic health and stability, they kind of just used it all and then didn't care about us. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that like the times we're in now, like the normalities and the comforts you get of like a first world, like living in a first world superpower, for those of us that do, like in the US, or even like living in like any first world country in the UK and stuff like that. All of these things that we have that we take for granted do not exist around the world in most places. This is actually a very like short span of time that we've lived comfortably right now with like nothing crazy, no like massive devastations, haven't had another world war yet or anything like that yet. But people don't realize how fast it can get taken away. I kind of realized that when I moved down south to places where there's like massive hurricanes and stuff like that, and seeing how quickly like if society breaks down. I'm not talking about like doomsday kind of stuff. What I'm talking about is like, like if there's a hurricane and people can't get water for like more than a day or two, like people really do not realize how bad it gets. And I think that we take for granted a lot of stuff that we have now in the modern world, and we don't. I think that future generations, if we don't start doing stuff like, I mean, even simple stuff is just like taking care of, like, you know, looking towards like taking care of the environment and stuff like that, taking care of the earth in general for like the next generations, or just, you know, like bettering your own country or your own group, you know, group of people that you're with, and just thinking like, oh, like, if we just keep going as it is, it's just going to continuously exist like that. That's not the case. You always have to fight for that, and you always have to be trying to, you know, better yourself. And I think that a lot of people now are absorbed in kind of the selfish aspect of like, hey, I'm just going to make sure I'm good, and we're like, you know, I'm immediately good, and I don't really care what happens, you know, later on down the line. It's like a culture of like instant gratification, kind of, you know. I think that later generations might look down the road and say, hey, and it is getting better. It is getting better than it used to be. I think people are starting to kind of see like, hey, like, you know, we need to start looking ahead instead of just like, hey, what are the problems that face our generation right now? Like, we need to look like, hey, not only what are the problems that face our generation, but what is going to be the problems that face, you know, the next generation and the next generation and whatnot. And I think that might be something that, you know, something that future generations look back on and kind of think like, hey, I wish that, you know, they had more of a, you know, mindset of, yeah, we need to make sure that like we are, you know, continually bettering ourselves for the next generation, and not just, you know, what's going on right now, you know?
Yeah. The idea that we forget how privileged we are as a first world society, if you have the privilege to live in one. That's such a big point, because most people, as you know, traveling through certain parts of Asia, or you know, just throughout the travels that I have done, and I'm by no means have seen every part of the world, or even seen, you know, the poorest regions of the earth, but knowing and having an understanding that those do exist, and that those lives are affected every single day, without us ever really knowing it firsthand, and understanding that we are so incredibly lucky and privileged to even have been born the place we were, and, you know, through no fault of our own. It's not anyone's fault that they were born in, you know, the poorest regions of Africa or wherever, and we were born in the U.S., or somebody was born in, you know, France, or somebody was born in the U.K., you know, any first world country. And it's easy to forget that those people, those lives are still being affected in North Korea or wherever. And when we think about that, I think often about, you know, if the world was a race, we're not all born on the same starting line, you know.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And taking that into account with everything that there is, everything that we have the opportunity to experience in life, all the pleasures that we get to experience, and the comforts of living in a country as flawed as it is as the U.S., like it's still a place that offers so much that so much of the world never even gets the opportunity to
exactly
have. And yeah, it just kind of builds like the whole collective thinking, like you said, to kind of bring it back to the question of understanding that there is so much disparity within the world, and so much hardship, and not taking that into account more is definitely one worth considering further.
People don't realize that, like I said, it's weird because we live in a time where it's never been easier to, you know, look out and see what else is out in the world, but people realize that there's a lot more going on than they're suburban area that they live in, and all the, you know, comforts that they have. And, it's, you know, it is interesting too. You see, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but, let's say you go to the workplace somewhere and you see somebody, a lot of times you'll see somebody who has immigrated from somewhere else, another country or something like that. And a lot of times I see those people have like a drive that, you know, some of these people that may come from these areas that are nowhere near as well off or as comfortable as the United States. They have this drive and this, I don't know if it's like work ethic drive and just this kind of like, that is just not comparable sometimes that you could see to people that have lived in comfort their whole life, you know? They're just so much harder workers sometimes. And like I said, I don't know if it comes from what exactly, I can't put my finger on what exactly it comes from, but, I would assume it would be just the, you know, the experience of having grown up somewhere where they don't have everything, you know, given to them. They have to physically, like you said, like everyone's born at different starting points, right? So if you have somebody who's been living on like Easy Street their whole deal and they're like, oh, whatever, like, yeah, sure, just coast into this job or whatever. And then you have the individual that was, you know, working from the ground up, you know, most of the time that individual who, you know, was disadvantaged at first and had to work to get to that point, like, they're not only going to have like much more experience, but they just have a better work ethic most of the time. That's something that I've seen, like working with people. Boeing is like a pretty, like you get a lot of people from all over the place. So, I've seen that a lot where you get people from all over the world. And, some of these people, like I said, that have come from a, not comfortable background, as you would, you know, describe looking at it from like, you know, the US standpoint, have like, just had this like tenacity about them, you know, and I think you know, it's like, I don't know, you know, it's just something I've noticed.
Definitely. I mean, there is merit to struggle, and there's merit to not having everything
absolutely
handed to you in a way that, a way that never forces you to, adapt. Yeah. And that's, you know, there's a huge part of life that comes from those experiences, and that shapes you profoundly when you don't have everything. But at the same time, there are some serious, like, I understand that from one perspective, but on the other hand, I take issue with it too, because there seems to be such extreme disparities between
absolutely.
You know, financial wealth disparities and like socioeconomic disparities that aren't, that should not be there, you know, that just shouldn't be there at all. And every life is distinct. Every life is different. Everybody is going to be experiencing a different experience, and will go through their own struggles. But there are some struggles in life that just shouldn't be there, you know, and taking that into account and realizing like just how much there is to progress, and how much privilege you might have within a certain area of the world is it just becomes even more and more important.
And I mean, I think that goes back into the concept too of like, are you going to be the person who's just going to be like living comfortably and not bettering their community, you know, and looking forward to it? Or, you know, are you going to use what you have to better your community and the people around you, kind of thing, you know? Because like you said, like there's a bunch of stuff that's, you know, people shouldn't have to go through, and that's, you know, not fair necessarily, in the world and in life in general. And, you know, if you're somebody who's in a place that can help build your community and build up, you know, the people around you, you know, I think that's something that's worth doing, you know, instead of necessarily just being like, well, I had it good, so I'm going to enjoy the cakewalk and everybody else can, you know, do whatever. So, yeah, I definitely think that's something to think about.
Totally. Are you somebody who is often, self-reflective on their own experiences?
More recently, yes. Kind of after, I guess after I started becoming a little bit more religious and stuff like that, I kind of started, looking back at, it kind of made me look at different things I was doing. It gave me like something to, I don't know if the right word is judge myself off of, but judge myself off of, I guess, 'cause that's the best word I can think of right now. But as of recently, I've started doing that more, and I've actually started writing down just different things I experienced, throughout my life and throughout my day. If it's something that I think that I'm going to, that might help me later. If there's an experience I go through or something like that, I'll write something down and be like, hey, this is what happened. This is how I dealt with it. This was the outcome of it. And honestly, this is going to be a odd comparison maybe, but when we were talking about working out and like you can't grow unless, or it's hard for you to grow if you're not tracking like how much weight you're lifting and what you're doing and what you're progressively getting better, it kind of is the same concept. If you're not keeping track, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be writing it down, but if you're not keeping track of like how you're growing and the different things that you've experienced and what you're doing, like how do you know you're growing, if that makes sense? If you're not reflecting on yourself, how do you know that you're becoming, either whatever your goal, the type of person you're trying to become, how do you know that you're becoming that person, if that makes sense?
That's a really good point. I like the comparison there to getting yoked. To
get in the gains.
To get in the gains. For anyone who can't see Dom, he's just absolutely massive.
Dude, huge. I'm almost like 7 feet tall, man. I gotta like walk through the doorway sideways.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I think that's a really good point because you don't really know unless you do keep track in some way, and I think that looks different for everybody. And I think in a lot of ways, just having positive relationships and relationships that can call you out are so important because
absolutely,
because that's a way of keeping track by people who see you for who know you intimately and who have gone through life with you in some sort of way that can see your evolution as a human being in so much complexity. Much more than even you can sometimes because I've had many conversations where I've talked to people that have given me insight into my own self that I never knew was there, and it's only because they knew me and because they saw me for what I was as a full complex human being. And it's something you can't necessarily recognize if you're only consumed by your own consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a pretty, like, it might be a cliche quote, but like the whole, like iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another type of deal. But, it really holds true, to be honest. Like if you're just, if you're going through life, on your own and you don't have anyone else to, see you, because obviously you see yourself as a certain type of person, and the world may see, other people around you may see you differently, right? Because they have a different perspective and stuff like that. And I think you need both things to be able to, build yourself. Otherwise you're just in an echo chamber with yourself, So, I think it is very important to not only reflect on yourself, but like you said, put yourself around people who will call you out or who will be like, hey, like, this, we'll tell you the truth and not just necessarily sugarcoat everything and be like, yeah, dude, like, everything you do is 100% right. Like, it's like, okay, I know it's not because I've done some stupid thing.
Because I'm pretty stupid.
Yeah, exactly. So, it really is true that you need other people around you to, help better yourself. And that's what, finding community and stuff like that and reaching out to people and just, it goes back into just talking to people, you could have some of the best outcomes in life by just like talking to people and like keeping a level, like cool head, because even if somebody is like the exact 180 opposite of you or just does not believe what you believe in, like, you are, I guess, naive to think that there's nothing that you think you can learn from somebody else, there's always something you can learn and be open to learning, even if it's from somebody who is completely on the other spectrum of you, I think it's important to stay open to that kind of stuff.
Yeah. we're so filled with bullshit so much of the time, and if we don't have somebody else to call us out on we're just, like you said, just get stuck in the echo chamber of our own mind. And I think that's when it gets really dangerous. And something I was thinking about actually was like newscasters, and we see like Fox News, CNN, whatever, pick your side. And I felt sympathy for a lot of like the people that were on the show, only because like no wonder you're espousing such extreme views in so many ways, is because you're only getting fed certain information. You're only getting fed one way of thinking, and they constantly have to be talking about it every day, as their job is to be talking about one specific way of thinking. And there's no real true respectful dialogue in any of it. And it's so dangerous because you're just getting stuck in your own loop of your own mind, or people that think just like you. And something for me that I've been so hard on myself about is taking views that I don't necessarily agree with, or I know nothing about, and to entertain them critically with a critical lens and with a grain of salt, but to really like reflect on them and to see whether or not there's any wisdom to be gleaned from views that might not be I guess obvious at the moment to think. And it's something that I do. I find that there is great value in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the divide, man. I have this conversation with my family members too, like, cause they get caught up in like the watching the news and being like, oh my God, like, and I always tell them like, dude, like, there's like, do you want to get screwed over by somebody wearing a red tie or a blue tie? Like, these people don't necessarily have the like, your best interests in mind, and even beyond that, like, humans in general are like a very like tribal species, and everyone wants to feel like they belong to something. And the thing is like, when you look at the news, you look at media, stuff like that, like, they know that and they feed off of it, because obviously that's where they're making all of their money from, right? So if they can polarize you one way or another and, basically get your brand loyalty to them, of course they're going to continue to make all this inflammatory content, and like I said, the entire spectrum is of, whatever you want to say, the news, political organizations, whatever, are guilty of it, and it just, again, it further, you can see directly. And it's funny because this keeps coming back to the same concept we were talking about, is it furthers the dehumanizing of each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, it furthers like, oh, this is our group, that's the other group. Like, we don't like them because of XYZ reason, and it stops people, because then their anger gets in the way of it, and it stops people from being able to stop and just be like, hey, let me have a conversation with this person. Let me, like, why do they, like, hey, why do you believe this? What's the reason you believe that? Okay, I understand this. This is why I believe this and that. And like, even if you don't come to like an agreement, you don't always have to come to an agreement, but like, you can treat that person like civilly, and you can learn from their point of view, like you can, like you said, like, you're a fool if you think you have the answers to it all on either side of anything,
Definitely. We're so completely ignorant of so much, yes. And just admitting our own ignorance of the immense amount of knowledge that we will never be privy to is radically important. I read this book. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and it's about why people are so divided on religion and politics. And it takes an interesting psychological perspective on this tribal mindset that we all inherently have. And it's without, just taking into consideration. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have to be an agreement. You don't have to all of a sudden join hands with the other person and think exactly the way they think. That's not what it's about. It's just entertaining a thought and allowing yourself to really critically think about it in a way that you're open and honest about how that might shape some of the perspectives that you have. And maybe you shouldn't be thinking a certain way, or maybe it even reaffirms how you're thinking. But without the conversation, without the actual true reflection on it and true intaking of information, genuinely trying to gain a better understanding of the world, whatever it might be. Without that, we're really not doing anything good for ourselves.
Yep, absolutely.
I kind of want to shift questions here a little bit.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Are you somebody who's do you meditate at all?
It's something I've kind of considered as of late. I have not done it yet. But as I start to kind of look into this, just self-betterment and stuff like that, I've considered it, and I kind of just need to actually just go and do it, but I think we've had a conversation about it before. You were saying that you had gotten into it, right?
Yeah. So I meditate, definitely something that I find, as one of the foundations of, my own mental health, is including meditation in that. And, the reason why I asked is because I know, for myself personally, what it offers, but, I by no means want to be preachy in any way.
No, you're not.
So I just, I'm just trying to gain an understanding of people's mindset behind, living an examined life and reflection on our own consciousness. Mm-hmm. And for me, consciousness is one of the things that I am most interested in what the foundations of consciousness are, what consciousness is, and meditation is an insight, at least in part, into what consciousness is. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's something that I could benefit from a lot, and that I'm going to look into actually doing. Like I said, I've looked into it, and I do recognize there's definitely benefits to it, and I want to do it. I just I have not done it yet, especially just as a de-stressor, just be able to sit down for, some portion of the day and kind of just reset, reset and reflect on, what's been, what occurred and whatnot, and just de-stress, so I think it definitely has some merit.
Totally. I mean, do you ever think about where thoughts come from?
I never thought about that. I mean, I guess I could say oh, well, I don't even know if I can tell you that, because I don't know. I guess that would tie into the same question of where does your consciousness come from?
Exactly.
Yeah. And
where does it come from? No. Yeah. That's, again, it kind of goes back to the overall.
Dude, you're breaking the matrix.
I'm breaking the matrix right now on this podcast. It kind of goes back to my, what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast was my inherent kind of, or I guess my profound change in the way that I think, and seeing existence for what it is, as something that is so ineffable and unknowable and so insane, really. And the only way we can actually experience anything in existence is through our own consciousness. Mm-hmm. We don't know anything outside our own consciousness. So diving into what consciousness is now something that I think about all the time. And it's something that I think I find so much interest in, where it's become such a staple in my life, just thinking about. And so that's why I like talking to other people about it who may or may not have given thought to this like I have.
Because I mean, you can even boil it down to the fact of what constitutes consciousness, because they're when you look at the animal kingdom and stuff like that, you have certain animals like orcas or killer whales and stuff like that are very, very intelligent creatures. And, they've even scientists have even talked about hey, they can experience a lot of the same emotions and different things that, that they think that humans can and stuff like that. So that even goes even further as to like, is consciousness like a uniquely human thing? Like, is it a uniquely like biological thing to like every living thing, to some degree? Like, when does it become consciousness or just like, biological function? And it's a very interesting thought,
Yeah, totally. And like, what is consciousness? Something that is separate from the mind, and that really the mind is something that like tunes into consciousness, or is it completely absent until something, or I guess, like information is built up to a certain level or a certain degree in which produces consciousness.
And here's sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
this ties in kind of to what we were talking about earlier with like when we were talking about like human nature, and like, having done horrible things or whatever. When you look at certain animals, right, like that are what you would not consider like on the intelligence scale, right? Like you look at like, I don't know, a snake or like any kind of animal that like kills to eat or do whatever, right? Like there's no morality based on that. They just are doing something. Like, when a lion kills a gazelle, it's not because it didn't like the gazelle. It's because there's a purpose to it, right? It's eating something to sustain itself. When you start to look at animals like I was using killer whales as an example, where they've been documented to like kill things like almost like sadistically or like for other purposes, not than like, sustaining life or food or something like that. And it's almost like when you start looking at stuff like this, like ability to be cruel or like aggressive is like almost like a side effect of intelligence, like unnecessarily cruel and aggressive, I guess, like, for other reasons than just, eating or whatever, reproducing, whatever they're doing. And that kind of ties me back into what I was saying of like the humanity in it all is like, obviously humans are seen as the most intelligent species ever to exist on the earth. So the humanity and all is being like, hey, we have this intelligence, you have this side effect that causes like this aggression, these different things and that stuff like that. But I think what separates like maybe like the human consciousness and the human ability is kind of like what I was saying before, is like the ability to be able to like, hey, I recognize that this is like something that like we are all, capable of, and we are choosing to be, be better. If that makes sense. Not act on that, not harm each other for no reason and stuff like that. I think it all kind of ties together, that's really interesting when you think about consciousness and stuff like that. Cause like I said, like what separates our consciousness from the next smartest being or animal,
Yeah. And, this is something that is heavily debated and discussed within the field of artificial intelligence, and how artificial intelligence is such a revolutionary way of information processing, and how complex it is compared to our own ability to compute certain mathematical or information that exists in the world and within data and computers. And is consciousness something that is just an aggregate of information or information processing? And I don't know. And people far smarter than I am are working on these sort of questions. I just think it's an interesting conversation to have and to get people thinking about, because something that I find important and something that ties together with artificial intelligence is the idea of like how we treat conscious creatures, whether or not we can see them as consciousness or conscious or not. And, do we start to treat robots that can do and say and act just as a human being? Do we start to treat them as people with consciousness, or as something else? Are they already way far advanced ahead of the human mind? Like we don't really know, and that's the crazy part.
That's a very good point, man.
And to me, it's like it's been described as philosophy with a deadline. It's like this technology is coming. It's here, and it's only going to advance as long as we don't blow ourselves up as a species, and we're going to continue to build upon the previous generations of artificial intelligence and computing power. Like, where does that lead us, and at what point do we start to analyze how we view people versus artificial intelligence, or even like creatures in general, which is something that I hold close to home, is like the treating of conscious creatures for as it pertains to like consumption of animals and stuff like that.
Well, I think this one's going to be might seem pretty wild to people, but if they look into it, they'll realize how much closer we are to this than they really think. And it sounds almost like science fiction, but I think the next step in like human evolution is going to be like the addition of technology like into the human body, if that makes sense. Like you see it with different things. Like look how far like things like prosthetics have come for people in like, just, a short amount of time. Or like, I think even like Elon Musk was working on some like Neuralink thing.
Neuralink. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think eventually, like once humanity figures out how to, incorporate different things into the human body, I would not be surprised if that like is the next, like part of the next evolutionary step of like, hey, like you literally have, some kind of technological implants or something like that to do things. I mean, think about how if they, they're already being able to start to like, get like synthetic organs and stuff like that, so now you're extending the lifespan of people that, may have one, before, if somebody had gotten a disease or a disorder in like, in their heart or some other like, very primary organ, now they're able to just, maybe not now, but down the line, they're able to just say, hey, here's a synthetic heart, or here's a synthetic lung or something like that, and I think it could grow from there. And, I think it's something that like, we do have to, be wary of, just like any kind of like, technological advance, because obviously when there's a good side of things, there's also like people who use stuff, negatively and for the bad side of things too. But that's just kind of, life in general and something that you have to deal with. But I think that it may sound crazy, but I mean, for anyone that's listening that has watched like Cyberpunk or something like that, like obviously maybe not to that crazy like level of stuff, but I would not be surprised if like 100 years in the future, like I said, if we're still around, that like it wouldn't be uncommon to be able to be like, hey, like I am going to get something like a Neuralink type thing that gives you like the ability to literally look up like access the internet, but just through your mind or thought process, something crazy like that. I don't know. It sounds crazy, but it's really not when you look at the technological leaps we've made in the last like, I'm not even going to say 100 years, but like 50 years or so.
Definitely, and when you think about it, even those are small timescales on the true history of the universe. Like when we see, and in the future of the universe, when we talk about a billion years from now, 2 billion, 10 billion, how far forward time will progress, and how small of a time we actually have here, and how humans have only known such a not even a fraction of what there is to be experienced in time. Absolutely.
Something that I've kind of always considered too is at some point, I don't know what year you could pinpoint it to or what, but like, there's like, if anyone's ever heard of like Pandora's box, like Pandora's box was opened at one point, and once that box is open, you cannot go back. And that's kind of like where we are, like, as a species right now, is like that box is open and humanity has a crossroad in front of them, and one leads to like the betterment of the world and society as a whole, and the other is like destruction of the world and society as a whole. Like you were saying, like, are we going to blow ourselves up, in however many years from now, which is, something that's kind of dark to think about, but unfortunately the way human nature is, as, unfortunately, is it could possibly be a consequence, of stuff like that. And I think that's where it comes into like us all trying to better ourselves, for our future generations, you know, so it doesn't lead to that. Yeah, it's just, it's very interesting to think about, kind of what we were talking about earlier too with, you know, if there's other life out there and stuff like that. If you think about it, like when people think about aliens and stuff like that, especially like look at like Hollywood and all the movies and stuff like that, people always think like, oh, if aliens were to come here, like they're going to like take over the earth and destroy the earth and do those things. Well, if you think about that, you know why people think about that? It's because that's what people have done for ever since they've existed. They've gone to a new area, wiped out the, you know, whoever was indigenous there and conquered it and whatever, you know, and that's a very like unique human mindset of thinking, you know, and I don't know if necessarily like that would be the case, you know, for for another, you know, if there was other life out there or something like that, or maybe it is, and the ones that have gotten to that point are like they've only gotten to that point by like solving some kinds of issues that we have not solved yet, and they're like, hey, yeah, there's no more like you know, conflict like how humans have between each other, you know, they're like some kind of unified species or something like that. I don't know. That's really crazy stuff to think about, like, I guess, depending on who you are or who you ask. But it's just a thought, you know, it's just a thought to think about.
Definitely. I mean, those are thoughts that that are immensely interesting because they seem, I think they seem like, oh, that's so far out from like the realm of possibility or like our time, but maybe they aren't, maybe it isn't, and it's somewhere in between. I feel like, you know, it's like maybe, you know, like you talked about, like you have this bifurcation of roads where one side leads to the destruction of all humanity and the other side doesn't. But then there's also so much middle ground in between, and like just the idea of, you know, what might occur through the choices that we do take. Yep. And, you know, how many universes might there be?
Dude, that stuff's I mean, just think about if you were, so like if you took like a human lifespan, like you said, like obviously people live to 100 years old. Like if you took somebody who was 100 years old, you know, they were born in 1923 or something like that, or even if you go a little bit before that, right? If you had told somebody back then, oh yeah, within your lifetime, or at least you and your child's lifetime, like, you know, there's going to be somebody on the moon. I mean, dude, think about like, I don't know the exact year, but it was the very early 1900s when the Wright brothers first flew, right? And like literally like paper airplane, essentially, with like a wooden paper airplane, right? Fabric airplane, you know, a couple 100 feet or something like that. Within 60 years of that time, somebody was on the moon. I mean, that is insane to think about. I mean, if you're talking about those like kind of technological jumps, like that was a time frame of 60 years. That was somebody's, like, that was an average lifespan time of somebody, you know, and just thinking about how fast technology progresses, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, it's nuts. It's very, very, easy to look at like what the next 100, 200 years, might be. And like, who knows, like, the possibility is endless, because like I said, you can say, oh, that's crazy to think like you're going to have like some kind of like, you know, cybernetic stuff or whatever and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, it sounds crazy, but I'm sure if you told somebody in, you know, 1903 or 1904, whatever it was, hey, you're going to have somebody on the moon in 60 years, they'd be like, yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? Definitely.
I mean, when I think about topics like this and how much there are these technological leaps, I think about, I guess, something that is more salient today in 2023 is like the James Webb Space Telescope, and how big of an advancement that is for the exploration of space. And, you know, I in a lot of ways, I think, you know, maybe it's not with this, but we have no idea, but we have no idea really when we might have the possibility of discovering alien life somewhere else in the universe. And I think really, like, this is the first time in humanity that we have any sort of possibility of discovering something incredibly interesting that lies beyond the cosmos. And that to me is immensely interesting.
Yeah. People don't realize, dude, they're literally like, we are literally like, this is the ground floor. Like, we're literally knocking at the door for, like, you know, the next step for humanity to expand out into the stuff. I mean, you know, literally the next frontier is outer space. And I think the fact that I'm not even going to say within our lifetime, because it's going to be relatively soon, that we're probably going to be sending people to Mars for the first time. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that's something that you would tell even the people, like I said, 60 years ago, or however many years ago when they were doing the Apollo missions, and you're saying, hey, we're going to go, within the next 60 years or so, we're going to go to, start looking to go to Mars, and actually talking about building a base on the moon to get, be able to launch missions to go to Mars and stuff like that. Like, those people would be like, no way, we're barely figuring out how to go to the moon, I mean, when you look at, the computing power of a processor in like those Apollo missions, an iPhone is like several times more powerful than the computers they were using to get to the moon then. So, I mean, it is pretty crazy to think like, wow, we're really like, we're knocking at the door of the next step, so.
Yeah. So with that being said, do you believe in aliens?
I actually do, man. I do. Which is odd because some people have a hard time, like, because as being a religious person, some people have like, they think it's a conflicting thing. And, I mean, I'm not going to, everyone has their own things. I'm sure there's people out there telling me like, oh, that means like you're not actually, this or that. And it's like, well, I don't really care that person's saying that, but because it's their own thing. But, no, yeah, I 100% do, believe. I don't know why. Like I said, me personally, I just think like, hey, I don't know why you can't incorporate that into the whole overall plan if you're religious or not. But that's everyone's own journey that I'm not going to get into. But me personally, yes, I do. I like I said earlier, I think in the beginning of when we were talking, like I think it's crazier to believe that there's not than there is.
I completely agree with that. It's you look up and just see how immensely vast and expanding the universe is.
Yes.
And think about where we are and think about how small we are and how short of an evolutionary time frame we've had to develop as humans. It becomes probabilistically just not justifiable to believe that alien or extraterrestrial life isn't out there somewhere.
Yeah,
probably.
Exactly.
Again, we don't have any 100% certainty of that yet.
But yeah, if you had exactly, and honestly, people will be like, "Oh, well, if it exists, and then why haven't anyone reached out to us?" And honestly, I think this too, because like humans in general, they think we're the center of everything. I mean, which is like I understand because we haven't made contact with anything yet. But when you think about it, right? Like, okay, what if these other if there is aliens, whatnot, like. If they're out there, what makes us so special that you think that they'd be doing everything they can to contact us, right? Like, how do you know they're not so far advanced from us that they look at us and they're just like, why would we go there? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't go through a forest and like look for like an anthill to be like, oh, I'm gonna, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's a unique, like, kind of like a perspective. It's like, well, what makes if there's one other, there's probably a lot of others, a lot of other societies out there. And that's the thing. It's like, if that's the case, like what necessarily could we offer them, other than probably being hostile towards them or whatnot. So they might just look at us and be like, yeah, we just don't want to deal with that. Maybe there's this whole thing of like, hey, they're like, yeah, they haven't gotten past like a certain, point technologically or like culturally yet where they're like, yeah, we're not going to deal with that because it wouldn't be good for us or probably them, I think there's people, like I said, they tend to be like, why, if they're real, why haven't they come to us? And it's like, dude, maybe we're not that important, Totally. You take a humanistic view, or anthropocentric view of like what the universe is. And we're so small and so minuscule, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And I think a lot of people think when you say that it devalues human existence or human meaning. Or creature meaning on this earth, and I don't think that. No, I think that they should look at it as in almost the opposite. Like, hey, it doesn't mean that like you don't matter because your existence is X amount small or whatever. It's like, no, your existence matters because you're part of all of this much bigger picture than you are, and as much as you might not notice it, you do influence it. You do influence it. the average person, like, you know, walking through down the street or whatever, might be like, oh, well, how am I influencing it? You know, you interact, think about how many people you interact with a day, how many people's moods you probably interact with a day, and like what you do to them and how you interact with them. It's probably a tenfold thing, right? You know, let's say you're an ass to somebody and you piss them off or whatever, and that they go home and they don't deal with it well and they take it out on their family members. Now, I'm not saying it's your responsibility. It's not. But what I'm saying is when you do look at it, like, you are affecting those other people, and like you're affecting a lot more people than you think you are. You know what I'm saying? That kind of, some people might not realize that, or they think it sounds silly, but like when you look at it, like I said, as from a community aspect, you know, if you're treating the people in your community and the people around you that you interact with, you know, poorly, or if you're treating them well, it's going to affect their day, and it's going to affect how they're treating the people around them. And it kind of puts that in like a bigger perspective, you know. That might sound like super, super small compared to what we were just talking about. But like I said, the average person, they might think like, oh, like it devalues, you know, oh, you know, we're just this little dot out here. What's going on? You know what I'm saying? But they don't realize like the value that, you know, a human life holds, and what they can, what you can do with it, you know?
Totally. I mean, it's the only thing we can know. I mean, regardless of where we are in the universe, how big or small we are, there's still well-being to be had, and there is still harm to be done. And so on either scale, our actions do affect the well-being of us creatures.
It's like a domino effect.
Collectively. Yeah. And I think, is that how you kind of reconcile religion with your a belief in extraterrestrial life?
Yeah, so as far as for me, what I do is, again, I'm sure there's people that listen, they're like, oh, well, you can't believe that, but I don't care. Again, I don't care if that's what they're saying, because it doesn't matter to me. But I look at it as in like, hey, like, just because there's an existence of aliens and stuff like that, or if there is an existence of other people, that doesn't mean, for me personally, it doesn't mean that my religion is defunct. You know what I'm saying? People can only do and only, how do I say this? Like, essentially what I'm saying is I don't have a problem like factoring that into the bigger picture of like, for myself, like a creator of all, you know, okay, if there's aliens, why does that mean they're not in, you know, God's picture or whatever, or something like that, or God's plan or something like that? You know, people tend to forget that like a lot of the things that have been passed down to us through a long, long time have been touched by other human hands, and have been, you know, touched and meddled with. And I don't necessarily think that when somebody says, oh, well, you know, like I said, like if somebody references the Bible and they're like, oh, the Bible doesn't say anything about aliens or something like that. It's like, well, okay, like so does that mean that like you can't believe in it if it doesn't exist? You know what I'm saying? Or if it's not in the Bible, it doesn't make any sense, you know? For me personally, I don't see why I can't, be like, hey, this is, a greater or part of a bigger picture, you know? I personally attach religion to it by just saying, like I said, if I exist, what is saying that there's, you know, God hasn't created other things that exist, you know? Personally, for me at least. Like I said, there's people that'll probably get super upset about that, but again, like I said, it's everyone's own, you know, interpretation to some degree. So
totally. And I mean, it kind of gets into like the philosophical ideas of like what things are.
Yeah.
But definitely it's an immensely interesting topic to contemplate, because there is a lot to discuss on that. But I want to wrap this up.
Yeah.
One last question. Mm-hmm. What are you most excited about listening to right now, music wise?
Ooh,
just right now.
Right now, like what am I most excited about listening to?
What do you like hyped about, you know, within the past, you know, little while, you're like, this is a song, artist. I got to get some good music recommendations for the listeners.
Yeah. Dude, Refused, actually. So Refused is like an old like punk rock band, and like if you like kind of like Rage Against the Machine or those type of music. So I actually got it because I got super into like the whole cyberpunk game and like playing it and stuff like that. And they did a cover They're a cover for a band in there called Samurai, and I didn't realize that until I looked it up, and I was like, oh, this is actually, because the band made music for the game, and I was listening to the songs from the game, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And if you haven't played the game, go play it, because Johnny Silverhand, extremely based. But so anyways, yeah, I started listening to their music and a lot of like that kind of stuff, like 90s punk rock. I've always liked Rage Against the Machine and stuff like that, but refused. And another band called Turnstile. It's all that kind of like
Turnstile. Yeah,
dude.
Turnstile. John, our one of our good friends, John, he saw Turnstile in Germany.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
Yes. Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
Turnstile's big. Turnstile's getting really big. Like they were like they just like blew up too.
Yeah.
They've gotten really big though, and they're really good.
They yeah, they're pretty good. I think because a lot of those bands, even Refused, they're I can't remember what country they're from, but they're from Europe too. They're out of Europe too.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's pretty sweet. That's what I've been listening to.
That's cool. Yeah, Turnstile's great. They got this indie, like punk, modern, hardcore style going on. They're really cool. I do like Turnstile. I'll have to listen to Refuse, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Refuse.
Cool. It'll be linked in the description.
There you go.
To Turnstile and Refuse. So cool. Thanks, Dom, for being on.
No problem,
I appreciate
dude.
the
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Of course.
That was pretty cool.